and increases some fees. The House will also begin work on a short-term farm bill extension today. Live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Reverend John Loudon, First Presbyterian Church, Lakeland, Florida.
Let us pray. Lord, we acknowledge our need for divine guidance and confess we are imperfect people in need of your forgiveness. We give thanks that you are not only a God of righteousness, but also a God of compassion, and offer us mercy. Empower us to live in such a way that we strive for balance in our lives and seek to exhibit conviction as well as grace. May we make our own an old prayer offered daily by Harry Truman. Everlasting God, help me to be, to think, and to act what is right, because it is right. Make me truthful, honest, and honorable in all things. Make me intellectually honest for the sake of right and honor, and without thought of reward for me. Give me the ability to be charitable, forgiving, and patient with others, and help me understand their motives and their shortcomings, even as you understand mine. Amen and amen.
Amen. The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal.
The questions on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The Journal stands approved. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make the point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in gratitude that my good friend, Pastor Mike Loudon from my home church in Lakeland, Florida, could give the opening prayer in the United States House of Representatives. Pastor Mike, as he's known back home, and his wife Joyce have lived a life of dedication to their faith and their family. Pastor Mike's ministry serves as an inspiration to everyone. Truly, he is a great man with a legacy of what counts in life and the life hereafter. Pastor Mike is a pillar in the Lakeland and Polk County communities. He is active in Rotary Club and is a strong leader, a man of God, and has a fantastic sense of humor. Pastor Mike has served churches across the country prior to coming to First Presbyterian Church in Lakeland in 1999. His messages are uplifting, encouraging, and always resonate with me. I am honored to have him as my pastor and as my friend. I join countless others in expressing a deep thankfulness for his willing spirit to serve and the privilege of having him give the opening prayer today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. House, 1 minute.
Excuse me. The Chair will entertain up to 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
To address the House, 1 minute, rise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that this administration is desperate to enroll young, healthy Americans in the new exchange plans. And a recent ad campaign from Progress Now Colorado shows just how low some groups are willing to go to catch young people's attention. The ads depict young men drinking right out of kegs of beer and objectifying young women. They try to encourage people to sign up for health care by making light of unhealthy behaviors. I recently received a letter from Dr. Julie Welsh, which I'll submit for the record, an emergency room physician in Indianapolis, specifically concerned about how the ads promoted risky sexual behavior. The Let's Get Physical ad depicts a young woman thanking Obamacare with the words, "Oh my God, he's hot. Let's hope he's as easy to get as this birth control. My health insurance covers the pill, which means all I have to worry about is getting him between the covers. I've got insurance. Now you can too. Thanks, Obamacare." Dr. Welsh writes, as a taxpayer, I'm puzzled at why advertising campaigns for health insurance appear to promote high-risk behaviors. Promoting health coverage by condoning binge drinking and promiscuity is not a step towards a healthier American. It's just another way that Obamacare just doesn't work.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont rise?
To address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. President, one of the most important challenges that this country faces with allies is to make certain Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. And for that reason, I, along with virtually all of my colleagues, voted for tough, enforceable sanctions. There's a question now in this House about whether Congress should present yet another resolution on Iran. There's two questions that raises. Number one, do we send a message to the world that Congress is not on the same page as our President and Secretary of State in their absolute determination to rid Iran of a nuclear capability? Number two, do we send a message to our allies in the P5+1 that include Russia and China, not exactly our best of friends, but our reluctant allies, who we need to guarantee that the tough sanctions that we impose are enforceable? If we pass sanctions that don't have the cooperation of our allies, they're meaningless. So the question that we have is, any action that we take, will it increase or diminish our strength in guaranteeing no nuclear weapons in Iran? I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, for the last 30 years, Social Security has been required to make deceased Americans' Social Security numbers and other personal information public through the so-called Death Master File. Unfortunately, identity thieves have been using this file to obtain fraudulent tax refunds based on the identity of deceased Americans, particularly children, like 4-year-old Alexis Agan here. No grieving family should have to go through this. To put a stop to this heinous crime, earlier this year I introduced the Alexis Agan Identity Theft Protection Act with my Democrat colleague Javier Becerra, and thanks to the budget deal, which includes a provision to restrict access to the Death Master File, American families will be better protected from tax fraud. I salute the Agans for their tireless advocacy. God bless America.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of over 90,000 unemployed New Jerseyans at the risk of losing their unemployment benefits on December 28th if Congress fails to act before the end of the year. Despite what my colleagues on the other side think, unemployment insurance helps during hard times, and people forget that we are still recovering from the worst recession since the Great Depression. Patrick, a carpenter from Rahway, New Jersey, struggles to find employment through no fault of his own. His family will not be able to afford their mortgage if this critical lifeline is cut. Maylene from Maplewood, New Jersey, is an educated professional but has been unable to find work since February. In her letter, she wrote, "When do my elected officials start caring for me and the millions of other people struggling to survive, not living but scraping by?" Vote to extend unemployment benefits will equate to hope for many families in the new year. I urge the House leadership to address this looming expiration of the unemployment benefits for millions of Americans before leaving this year. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, during last night's town hall by telephone with constituents, I conducted a poll and asked what should be done first to tackle our national debt. 51% of participants want Congress to repeal Obamacare. Obamacare will add to our national debt as higher premiums and taxes are placing burdens on families and destroying jobs. Rachel from West Columbia says, quote, Obamacare is still very costly for me and my family. At times, we have difficulty purchasing food for our family because of insurance costs. Robert from Aiken spent time on the website and found, quote, he would be paying about 2/3 more for a much worse insurance plan. 2013 should be remembered as the year further revealing the failure and threat of big government, with the Obamacare train wreck, continuing of the Benghazi cover-up, the IRS targeting, NSA spying, and DOJ FBI eavesdropping on media. Congress should act, passing limited government reforms that encourage job creation and expand freedom. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we'll never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
To address the House for up to 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this time of year, as we gather with family and friends, it's important for us to remember the men and women in the military who sacrifice so much for our country. Those who've been injured in battle oftentimes find themselves a long way from home during the holidays. This year, like every year, I'm donating the over 68,000 frequent flyer miles that I received from congressional travel to the Fisher House Hero Miles program, which provides free airline tickets so that American soldiers and their families can be together. The Fisher House has provided more than 40,000 flights worth some $63 million to wounded troops and their families. We've got no business keeping these frequent flyer miles for personal use anyhow, and I don't know of anyone who can make better use of them. I encourage all members of Congress to follow my example and give their frequent flyer miles to some charity like the Fisher House. It's not just a good thing to do, it's the right thing to do. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you today to commend Magnus Library on its 100 years of service to the people of McMinnville in the 4th District of Tennessee. Magnus Library began as a service project in July 1913 by Mrs. Mary Cunningham and the McMinnville Women's Civic League, with benefactors Colonel Gentry Moffett and W.H. Magnus to provide a rest stop for families coming into town to sell and trade. In 1917, the library moved to its current location on the corner of Chancery and Main Street, and in 1946, Magnus Library joined the Tennessee State Library and Archives. Thanks to generous donations from thousands of patrons, the Magnus Library flourished into one of the longest-running libraries in our state over the years. The library provides invaluable services to McMinnville, including a strong summer reading program for children and genealogy research for adults. Congratulations to the Magnus Library on their centennial, and I look forward to seeing their successful future endeavors. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, if the interim nuclear deal negotiated last month leads to a final agreement, Iran can be prevented from developing a nuclear weapon. This would neutralize one of the greatest threats facing the United States, Israel, and the international community, and could set the stage for a new era of relations between Iran and the West. The unprecedented sanctions already in place have brought the Iranian economy to its knees and the government to the negotiating table. We are entering these talks from a position of strength, a strong hand to play. But if Congress rushes through another round of sanctions, or takes other action perceived as undermining the negotiations, we'll be giving up our hand before we have a chance to play it. Iran would then have a chance to walk away from the table, and the international coalition that's been so critical to the current sanctions regime could fracture, thus weakening the leverage we already have. There's no guarantee that a final deal is possible, but given the stakes involved, we simply must try, for the alternative is far worse. Iran would then be left to develop its nuclear program without supervision. The U.S. could be drawn into another costly war in the Middle East. I urge my colleagues to support the interim nuclear agreement, oppose any attempt to undermine our country's diplomacy.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, each year Congress deliberately acts to craft, pass, and sign into law the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual policy bill for the U.S. Department of Defense. For the first time in 52 years, this may no longer be the case. This year, the House passed its version in June, while the Senate again dragged its feet. Fortunately, earlier this week, congressional leaders reached a compromise that will allow both chambers to move forward. It includes an important amendment I offered, accepted under the House version, dealing with the Transitional Assistance Management Program, or TAMP, which offers health care coverage for service members transitioning into civilian life. All too often, symptoms related to post-traumatic stress do not appear until 8 to 10 months after deployment. The amendment will extend coverage under TAMP by 180 days for all services rendered through telemedicine, which is critical, especially for those coping with mental injuries. As a father of an active-duty soldier, I am hopeful we can bring this bill to the finish line and make good on our commitments to our troops and continue meeting our obligations around the world. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate Human Rights Day, an occasion to recognize the struggles of individuals all around the world who fight for their basic right of life, liberty, and security of person. On March 2, 2011, Jean-Claude Roger Mbede of Cameroon was arrested for, and I quote, homosexuality and attempted homosexuality, end quote, and sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. Jean-Claude is one of the individual cases of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission's Defending Freedoms Project, which seeks to have members of Congress adopt the case of an individual like Jean-Claude and work for their rights and freedom. Sadly, cases such as these are far too common in areas of the world where people can be imprisoned for simply exercising their basic human rights. I call upon the Cameroonian authorities to live up to their obligation to respect and protect the rights of Jean-Claude Mbede and all Cameroonians. I pledge to continue to follow his story and do what I can to secure his safety. I hope my colleagues will join me in taking up cases from the Defending Freedoms Project and that together we can ensure justice for wrongly imprisoned individuals all across the world. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas rise?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise its plenary remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the number of Americans who support updating our electronic communication privacy laws is growing every day. Just today, the Washington Post reported that over 100,000 Americans have signed a petition asking President Obama to support changes in a 27-year-old privacy law called the Electronic Communications Privacy Act that currently allows government agents to search Americans' private emails without a warrant. The Constitution prohibits government from searching postal mail without a warrant. It defies common sense that emails should have any less protection. Our existing laws were written before Facebook or Google even existed. Just think how far we've come in regards to Internet technology. It's time to update these laws. The American people are shocked when they learn that their emails do not have the same privacy protections as their mail and other documents in their homes. That's why I introduced H.R. 1852, the Email Privacy Act, a bipartisan bill to affirm that Americans have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their emails. Mr. Speaker, it's time Congress and the President work together to update our email privacy laws. I urge the House to pass this needed legislation. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Over the next few weeks, the American people will be celebrating the warmth of the holidays with friends and family alike. But for nearly 1.3 million people, the situation will be desperate. The pains of long-term unemployment will be compounded as their benefits totally run out on December 28th. These people have struggled for months on end to find work after losing a job. They include thousands of veterans who recently completed their military service. And they include families who need unemployment benefits to clothe their children and put food on the table. It's unconscionable that this budget deal does not protect these vulnerable families who had no part in causing the recession that put them in such dire circumstances. As we go into this holiday season, let us help those in greatest need. Extend unemployment benefits.
The gentlelady yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend in Louisville, the world-famous twin spires of Churchill Downs glowed orange in support of something the hallowed track knows well, a champion. The DeSales High School Colts of Louisville's South End entered the state championship on a streak of dominance, posting 6 shutouts and holding opponents to just 9.4 points per game. When they lined up against Newport Central Catholic to play for the title on Saturday, the DeSales defense hadn't allowed a point in 2 weeks. Fueled by 3 touchdowns from all-time leading rusher Dylan Bird, 2 passing scores from quarterback Nathan Roush, and a defense anchored by middle linebacker Matt Bouchard, the Colts overcame a tough opponent 34-26, taking state for the first time in school history. The title caps a remarkable 14-1 season for the Colts, who became only the 2nd South End team ever to win state. For DeSales head coach Harold Davis, the title run offered a nice symmetry. Davis was a senior safety on the 1981 DeSales team, one of only 2 others in school history to play in the finals. The debate over the best Colts team in school history will continue back home, but there's no question this year's team now stands at the top. They might have been outsized through much of the playoffs, but they were never outmatched or outplayed. Mr. Speaker, today I'm proud to join all of Louisville in honoring the DeSales Colts, Kentucky's 2013 Class 2A high school football champions. Go Colts!
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon rise? Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It appears as though the rumored sanctions legislation dealing with Iran may not reach the floor this week. That would be good news. It is imperative that we take this optimistic development that gives us a chance for a diplomatic resolution of the differences with Iran and prevent them from developing nuclear weapons to come to fruition. We must not give excuses to Iranian hardliners who hate America a reason to walk away. We don't want to confuse our allies who we rely upon to make sanctions work, be confused about our intentions. It is imperative that we move forward aggressively, thoughtfully, to make the most out of this 6 months, using diplomacy to make sure that the majority of Iranians who recently voted for a change in direction and a relative moderate as president are reinforced. This is a unique moment in history. I'm pleased that it looks like the House might not screw it up. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight a recent discovery by researchers at the University of California at Davis. Earlier this month, Professor Peter Armstrong, a professor at the university, published a new role for blood clots, absorbing bodily toxins. Blood clots are known to be critical in protecting wounds by stopping blood flow and preventing contaminants from entering the body. Dr. Armstrong and his colleagues, knowing that lipopolysaccharide, a toxin in the body, is released during septic shock, and demonstrated that this toxin is absorbed by blood clots, inhibiting it from circulating within the body. This study, funded by the National Science Foundation, brings us one step closer to understanding the human body and improving medical care. We must continue funding science and health research projects, as the next great discovery just may save your life. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
As a member who has consistently voted to impose sanctions on Iran, I commend Secretaries Kerry and Sherman for an excellent job in seeking to safeguard our families through tough, persistent diplomacy with Iran. We should fully support their vital efforts. Iranian hardliners may ultimately obstruct a meaningful permanent agreement, but we should not give them a pretext for doing so. Those here who would interfere or limit these negotiations are really offering the American people only one alternative. It is called war. We have been there and done that before. Military action in Iraq cost us very dearly. It did not make us safer. Let's not repeat this deadly mistake. While difficult and uncertain, diplomacy is already eliminating chemical weapons from Syria. It represents our best hope to prevent nuclear weapons in Iran and assure the safety of our families and others around the world. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it is with great sadness that I observed the passing of Justice John Gabbert, who died Monday at the age of 104. A longtime Riverside resident, Justice Gabbert was a dedicated public servant, a key founder of UC Riverside, and a prominent leader in Riverside's expansion from a citrus-growing town into an urban center. Justice Gabbert was 3 years old when his family moved to Riverside in 1912. After graduating from Poly High School, he stayed in the community to attend Riverside City College, where his interest in law was sparked by the infamous chicken coop murders. In 1934, Gabbert received his law degree from UC Berkeley and returned to Riverside to serve as a county deputy district attorney. Subsequently, he worked in private practice as part of what is now Best & Krieger. He also served as a member of the local school board, but John Gabbert is mostly known as a fine jurist. In 1949, he was appointed to be a Superior Court judge, and finally, in 1970, he was appointed to be an Associate Justice of the 4th District Court of Appeal. Throughout his life, John Gabbert touched the lives of so many people. He will be greatly missed. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of us are congratulating each other over this bipartisan budget agreement. But I want to remind us that there is still some unfinished business that we need to take care of. Unemployment is still a very real issue for our nation and for our communities. And in my district, unemployment is as high as 16.9%, twice the national average. If we fail to take immediate action and we allow these emergency unemployment insurance to expire, just in California, 214,800 people alone will lose their benefits by December 28th, and an additional 325,800 unemployed California workers will lose their benefits in the first 6 months of the year. This is really unacceptable. A failure to extend this critical lifeline to those in need would not only be a devastating blow for millions of American families already struggling, but it would hurt our own recovery of our economy. Now is not the time to pull the rug out from under millions of Americans who've lost their jobs through no fault of their own. Speaker Boehner, I urge you to do the right thing and not adjourn this House without extending federal unemployment insurance for millions of Americans. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in honor of Ronald K. Moore of Aurora, Colorado, who passed away from a stroke on November 12th at the age of 71. Mr. Moore was born on March 25, 1942, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, the son of Clarence Delmer and Golden Viola Moore. In 1961, Mr. Moore graduated from Wheeler County High School in Fossil, Oregon. He went on to serve in the United States Navy during the Vietnam War on board the aircraft carrier USS Coral Seas, as well as duty in Rhode Island at the Naval War College. In the spring of 1963, he married Nancy H. Healy, and on March 29th of this year, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. Mr. Moore began working for United Airlines in 1966 and spent decades in the field of de-icing until retiring in 2003 after 37 years. He held multiple patents for inventions in both information and system operations, as well as software products used in the process of de-icing. His inventions and patents are still in use today in order to help determine check time for de-icing fluids, which allows for safe travel during inclement weather. My thoughts and prayers go out to his surviving family members, including his wife of 50 years, Nancy Moore of Aurora, Colorado, his son, Jason Moore of Chula Vista, California, also a Navy veteran, his daughter, Sandra Lavalle of Aurora, Colorado, and his sister, Carol Ellis of Kennewick, West Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Hampshire rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we approach the end of the calendar year, I'm proud that both chambers have finally come together to pass the 2014 National Defense Authorization Act. This important bill will help ensure that men and women of our armed services have the resources they need to do their job and keep our country safe. I'm especially pleased that this legislation includes important reforms to help prevent military sexual assault by better protecting whistleblowers and holding perpetrators accountable for their actions. This critical reform is an amendment from legislation introduced by my Republican colleague, Representative Jackie Walorski, and my Democratic colleague, Representative Loretta Sanchez, that passed the House with 110 bipartisan co-sponsors and nearly 50 members of our freshman class. Because of our joint efforts working across the aisle, this is a great first step in furthering protecting heroes in uniform who take the extra heroic step of coming forward to blow the whistle on military sexual crimes. It's been an honor to help build support for this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to continue to work to end sexual violence in our military. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the list of issues that the 113th Congress has failed to address is long. Immigration reform, gun violence, long-term joblessness. Yet on this list of opportunities squandered by Republican obstructionism and indifference is also the threat of global climate change. As a member of the Safe Climate Caucus, I want to emphasize that this threat is real, and it needs real solutions. In South Florida, we know that unchecked carbon pollution poses an existential threat to our communities. Rising sea levels endanger the safety of our residents and the viability of our economy. That's why Palm Beach, Monroe, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties have formed a climate compact dedicated to mitigating climate change. Yet local task forces cannot replace national leadership. We need a nationwide effort to limit carbon pollution, speed the adoption of clean energy, and protect our people from unprecedented natural disasters. Every member of this House belongs on the Safe Climate Caucus. Don't we all agree that as Americans, it's our responsibility to pass on a healthier and safer environment to the next generation? Mr. Speaker, addressing global climate change will take courage. Anything less, I'm afraid, is cowardice. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 438 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 78, House Resolution 438. Resolved, that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to take from the Speaker's table the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, with a House amendment to the Senate amendment thereto, and to consider in the House, without intervention of any point of order, a motion offered by the Chair of the Committee on the Budget or his designee that the House receive from its amendment and concur in the Senate amendment with the amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, modified by the amendment printed in Part B of that report. The Senate amendment and that motion shall be considered as read. The motion shall be debatable for 70 minutes, with 60 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on the Budget, and 10 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the motion to its adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question. Section 2. The Chair of the Committee on the Budget may insert in the Congressional Record at any time during the remainder of the first session of the 113th Congress such material as he may deem explanatory of the motion specified in the first section of this resolution. Section 3. In the engrossment of the House amendment to the Senate amendment to the House Joint Resolution 59, the clerk may conform division, title, and section numbers and conform cross-references and provisions for short titles. Section 4. The Chair of the Committee on Armed Services may insert in the Congressional Record at any time during the remainder of the first session of the 113th Congress such material as he may deem explanatory of defense authorization measures for fiscal year 2014. Section 5. It shall be in order at any time on the legislative day of December 12, 2013 or December 13, 2013, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15. The Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section. Section 6. On any legislative day of the first session of the 113th Congress after December 13, 2013, A. The journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved, and B. The Chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution, to be announced by the Chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 7. On any legislative day of the second session of the 113th Congress before January 7, 2014, A. The Speaker may dispense with the organizational and legislative business. B. The journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved if applicable, and C. The Chair at any time may declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution, to be announced by the Chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 8. The Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of the Chair for duration of the period addressed by Sections 6 and 7 as though under Clause 8A of Rule 1. Section 9. Each day during the period addressed by Sections 6 and 7 of this resolution shall not constitute a calendar day for purposes of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution 50 U.S.C. 1546. Section 10. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 3695 to provide a temporary extension of the Food, Conservation, and Energy Act of 2008 and amendments made by that Act as previously extended and amended and with certain additional modifications and exceptions to suspend permanent price support authorities and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment printed in Part C of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Agriculture, and 2. One motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 11. The requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a two-thirds vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House is waived with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of December 13, 2013.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for the purpose of debate only, I would like to yield the customary 30 minutes to my friend from New York, Ms. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Okay. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, for purposes, during consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for debate purpose only, and I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
As we're doing housekeeping here at the beginning, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to ask unanimous consent that a section-by-section analysis of provisions within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Rules be made a part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't speak for my friend from New York, but I enjoy the Rules Committee debate when it begins with such a long reading from the reading clerk, Mr. Speaker, because you know you're involved in something special on a day like today. If it was just an ordinary rule, we would be done with that reading in 15 or 20 seconds and we'd move on to debate. But the rule today, Mr. Speaker, is taking on a number of challenges. We are trying to move a budget conference report forward. This rule makes an opportunity for us to have that debate here on the floor of the House. We are trying to move an SGR fix, what they call the sustainable growth rate, Mr. Speaker. That's that provision that threatens to cut double digits from the reimbursement rates of physicians, hindering the access of seniors to their Medicare benefits. We're trying to solve that here today, again, bringing forward a bipartisan, bicameral solution to that. And finally, we're making available an opportunity to extend the Farm Bill language. We've gotten so close, again, Mr. Speaker, to a bicameral, bipartisan solution to the Farm Bill. Those folks who are deeply involved in those negotiations tell us if they can just get 30 more days, they'll be able to get that done for the first time in far, far too long. This rule makes that debate available here on the floor of the House. And finally, in terms of housekeeping, there are so many other provisions that are being worked on, again, Mr. Speaker, in a bipartisan, bicameral way, bills that are almost ready to go to the desk of the President of the United States to be signed into law to address so many of the issues that are of concern to men and women across this country. This rule makes those provisions, any provision that the House deemed necessary, available to be considered in the same day. Now, I just want to be clear, as my colleague from New York knows, that's not the way we like to do business in this chamber. There are a lot of serious members in this chamber, and every single one of them deserves an opportunity to review legislation before it comes to the floor. And so we have made a very strong commitment throughout this Congress to provide a 3-day layover for folks to review legislation. But during this season, with so many issues so close to fruition, issues that we've been working on not for a day, not for a week, but issues that we've been working on collectively for months, those issues are almost ready to come to the floor, and so we waive that requirement that those bills lay over to make it possible for us to get as much of the people's business done as is allowable by the agreements that the House and the Senate come to. Mr. Speaker, I have the great pleasure of sitting on the Budget Committee and the Rules Committee. In fact, I'm only on the Budget Committee as the Rules Committee designee. And the proudest votes that I've been able to take in this House in my 3 years with the voting card of the folks of the 7th District of Georgia have been on those budgets that we have crafted together in the Budget Committee, that we have brought to this floor, and that we have passed here on the floor. In fact, as you know, Mr. Speaker, for far too long, the House has been the only institution in town that has been able to pass a budget. The Senate joined those ranks this year for the first time in a long time, and I'm proud to have them here. But we've been getting that business done. What we haven't been able to do is then take the budget that the House has passed and combine it with a budget that the Senate has passed in order to create a vision of the United States of America for the coming years. Candidly, Mr. Speaker, with what I have seen in this town, with what I read of the differing opinions that are on each side of the aisle, on each side of the Capitol, America didn't have any reason to expect that we would be able to come to an agreement this year either. They didn't. But we sent one of our best and our brightest, Chairman Paul Ryan of the Budget Committee, into those negotiations. And he was joined, I have to say it, Mr. Speaker, by one of my colleagues from Georgia, Dr. Tom Price, also one of our best and our brightest, put that Georgia stamp of approval on where we were headed with the budget conference report, and teamed up with our colleagues in the Senate. Senator Patty Murray led the Senate side, led the Democratic side, led the Senate side, and they worked, again, not for a day, not for a week. They worked tirelessly around the clock to try to find an agreement that we could have together. Now, I'm a person who came here for big ideas, Mr. Speaker. I don't think you came here to do the little things. I think you came here to do the big things. I know my friend from New York came here to do the big things, those things that would really make a big difference for America. We don't have that big budget deal on the floor. This rule doesn't make available debate on a big budget deal. We could not find the big budget deal, and for that I am deeply sorry. I wish that we could have found that. But what we did find are those elements of agreement that were available to be found. I've grown fond in the recent weeks, Mr. Speaker, as we've been rolling through this, of a quote first shared with me by our Deputy Whip, Peter Roscom. It was from a Thomas Jefferson letter to Charles Clay in 1790, and he says this, Mr. Speaker: "The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, and we must be contented to secure what we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. It takes time to persuade men to do even that which is for their own good. We're in the game of inches here today, Mr. Speaker, and I expect you'll hear the same thing from my colleague from New York. We're going to secure today what we can get from time to time, and we are going to eternally press forward for that that is yet to get. Now, my sense is my friend from New York is going to eternally press forward in this direction, and I'm going to be eternally pressing forward in this direction, as is the process here, as she follows the wishes of her constituents and I follow the directions of mine. But we have an opportunity today, for the first time in the 3 years that I have served in this body, to come together on a budget agreement to get that which we can get before we both wake up tomorrow morning and begin to eternally press forward on that which is yet to get. I am grateful to those folks who have negotiated this budget deal. I'm grateful to the folks of the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee who have come together, again, to find that bicameral, bipartisan SGR solution. I am grateful to my friends on the Ag Committee on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Capitol who have been working so long and so hard to find that agreement on the Farm Bill. My great hope, Mr. Speaker, is that we are, with this beginning of the rule today, laying that framework and that foundation for bipartisan, bicameral agreement, not just for this hour, not just for this day, but for this week and this month and the remainder of this Congress. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. Yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that the legislation before us today gives us a chance to begin to mitigate the worst effects of sequestration. But it is not enough, as my colleague has stated. Our nation can and should dare to once again dream big. We're a nation that built one of the largest interstate highway systems in the world that is presently crumbling, launched the Internet, pioneered the creation of GPS, created the largest middle class on earth through a fair and balanced tax code that asked everyone, including the wealthiest among us and the biggest corporations, to pay their fair share. And we're home to public institutions like the National Institutes of Health, which have helped to find the cures for countless diseases and conditions and saved millions of lives. Great achievements like these are only behind us if we so choose. I strongly believe that we can rebuild our crumbling runways, our roads and rails, and restore our middle class, and invest in the breakthroughs that will once again make us the envy of the world. But in order to do so, we have to take responsible fiscal choices that are a reflection of our values. That means restoring smart and targeted funding to the programs and agencies that drive our country forward, asking the most fortunate among us to pay their fair share, not more than that, their fair share, and protecting the programs that serve hardworking Americans at times when they need help the most. To that end, it is shameful that the legislation before us does not extend unemployment benefits for the 1,300,000 Americans scheduled to lose them within a matter of weeks, 3 days after Christmas, actually. In the United States of America, we believe in providing a hand up, not a kick while you're down. And unemployment insurance is that hand up. And studies have shown that unemployment insurance allows job seekers to purchase necessities such as groceries and gas without accruing further debt. In so doing, it helps to increase the economic activity while easing the financial burden of unemployment. Americans need to make it easier, not harder for them, as we are, to find a new job. That's why my Democrat colleagues, Representative Levin, Representative Van Hollen, Representative Barbara Lee, introduced an amendment in the Rules Committee last night to extend the unemployment insurance for an additional 3 months, just 3 months. This bill was paid for. I want to make that perfectly clear. Would not have cost an extra dime. Inexcusably, the majority rejected my colleague's amendment, despite inserting language to fix Medicare payments to doctors over the coming year, which is certainly important. Fixing the Medicare payments to doctors is a worthy and important goal. But it is certainly troubling and should be to all of us that we are unwilling at the same time to ignore the needs of the unemployed. The majority's refusal to extend a helping hand to jobless Americans stands in stark contrast to the defense of tax loopholes for big corporations and powerful special interests. For far too long, our nation has allowed wealthy individuals and powerful corporations to hide billions of dollars in offshore bank accounts and create tax loopholes instead of paying their fair share. Indeed, some corporations in America pay no taxes at all. It is unfortunate that not a single one of the loopholes is addressed in the bill that is before us today to help us reduce the national debt. Despite these shortcomings, today's legislation does take an important first step toward easing the painful budget cuts contained in sequestration. It has been an unmitigated disaster that has hurt our economy and our country, and there is an urgent need to avert the next round of budget cuts that are scheduled to take effect, and I am grateful for that. In a study conducted earlier this year by the Association of American Universities, 81% of the respondents declared that sequestration cuts had immediate and detrimental effects on research activities. 70% of the respondents cited delays in research projects, and 58% respondents stated that in sequestration that lead to reductions in staff, students, and fellows through attrition and layoffs. And a recent study showed that sequestration and other budget cuts have resulted in a National Institute of Health budget far too low to support our biomedical research community. In addition to that point, Mr. Speaker, let me say that during the government shutdown, which cost the economy $24 billion and was useless, that the 5 Nobel laureates employed by the United States of America, only one was declared essential. 4 Nobel laureates were said to be not essential. That blows the mind, doesn't it? These types of drastic budget cuts have profound impacts on our country. Reduced funding means that new discoveries and breakthroughs are delayed or never realized, and our public health knowledge is stunted for years to come. As a microbiologist, I can tell you that you cannot simply turn research off and on like a faucet. But that's exactly what we do when we arbitrarily slash the budgets with no regard of the consequences of our cuts. And that's why today's legislation is an important step forward in our country. We must end the self-inflicted wound that is sequestration and get back to investing in our own well-being and the future of America. By restoring funding across our government, we will help to jumpstart our economy and get back to work on the cutting-edge research and on infrastructure that will benefit the nation in years to come. So in closing, today's bill is an important step forward, but our work is not done until we add an extension of unemployment insurance to this legislative package. And we will give you an opportunity to do that at the end of the rule. In so doing, we can ensure a brighter, more prosperous future for every American this holiday season. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on the rule, and I preserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentlelady from New York, and I appreciate her mentioning all of those things that we are working on together. The gentlelady is absolutely right. We had an opportunity in the Rules Committee last night to add to these bills that we're considering today, these bills that are bicameral, bipartisan solutions to a budget, these bills that are bicameral, bipartisan solutions to a farm bill, these bills that are bipartisan, bicameral solutions to keep our seniors' access to Medicare, to add to that an unemployment extension that we in the Rules Committee were seeing for the very first time. I don't know what the committees of jurisdiction were doing. I certainly was one of those no votes last night, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that's the appropriate place to do that, but I will say to my colleagues again today, as I said to them last night, I am so pleased that this rule contains that same-day authority, Mr. Speaker, that I mentioned earlier, because if my colleagues, who I know have deeply heartfelt opinions about this issue, as do I, If that bipartisan, bicameral agreement can be found, this House has the opportunity, if we pass this rule today, and only if we pass this rule today, but if we pass this rule today, we'll have the opportunity to bring such a package up. I hope we can find that agreement, but at the moment, Mr. Speaker, I hope we can pass this rule so that if such an agreement is found, we'll have the authority on the floor of the House to bring that agreement immediately to this floor for consideration. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, a member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. McGovern.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I thank the ranking member for yielding me the time. Mr. Speaker, let me first of all begin by congratulating Congressman Ryan and Congressman Van Hollen and Senator Murray for coming together and trying to work out a bipartisan budget deal. And it is far from what I would deem as perfect, but it begins to chip away at this awful sequestration that my Republican friends seem to be so enamored with. But I want to come here on the floor to echo what the ranking member said in terms of expressing outrage over the fact that my Republican friends want to leave town without addressing the issue of extending unemployment compensation for 1.3 million Americans. Because they're going to leave town tomorrow, and on December 28th, you know, after they've opened up all their presents and wished everybody a Merry Christmas and had a wonderful dinner, on December 28th, 1.3 million of our fellow citizens will be cut off totally from their unemployment compensation. Now, I want to put this in perspective. On November 1st, the American Recovery Act funds ran out in terms of supporting the SNAP program, which means that everybody on SNAP, everybody, has received a cut. So the average family of 3, Mr. Speaker, received a $30 reduction in their SNAP benefit. That's their food benefit. That's about 16 meals. May not sound like a big deal to some of my friends on the other side of the aisle, but for millions of families in this country who are struggling just to put food on the table, it is a big deal. And on top of that, they're going to say to these 1.3 million people and their families, you know, we don't care. We don't care. We're leaving town. And since when do my Republican friends have to wait for a bicameral, bipartisan deal on anything to bring this to the floor? They brought a repeal of the affordable health care to the floor about 4 dozen times. Since when do they wait to get a backroom deal with the Senate before we're allowed to vote on something on the House floor? That's an excuse. That's an excuse. It's a poor excuse. We ought to be doing the people's business, and that means not turning our backs on millions of Americans who are struggling during this difficult economy. We ought not to be making excuses. We ought to do something, and this is an opportunity to do it. Defeat the previous question, as the ranking member said, and we could have a vote on extending unemployment compensation for these 1.3 million people. And it's paid for. If you don't want to do it, you can vote no. But for those of us in this chamber who believe we have a moral obligation to those people, we want that vote. And let us vote for the extension and then send it over to the Senate. Let's take some leadership on this issue. Let's not turn our backs on the most vulnerable in this country. It has become unfashionable in this Congress to worry about the poor. It has become unfashionable to stand up for these programs just to help people get by. This is the holiday season. Have a heart. Have a heart. We ought to do something here. We ought to help these people, not just skip town. So there's no excuses. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, vote no on the previous question. Let us vote on the extending unemployment compensation, and let us do the right thing. Let's not make excuses. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am glad that our bipartisan, bicameral spirit lasted for the first 5 minutes of the debate. It was going to be too much to ask that it lasted much longer. I regret that. But I will say to you, Mr. Speaker, if you want to know why problems are so hard to solve in this town, when the folks who have such a heartfelt commitment to solving the problems begin the presentation with, and we could do this except for those heartless Republicans, it's easy to see why disagreement prevails and agreement is hard to find. I will say to my friend that I appreciate his recognition of the tireless effort we've put in on this side of the aisle to repeal the President's health care bill, which is denying not only the choice of plans to my constituents, it's restricting their choice of doctors as well. But the issue that he brings up is an important issue, Mr. Speaker, And I hope that we will have more success on his issue than we have had the 40 times trying to repeal the President's health care bill. If what he wants is a symbolic vote on this issue, well, more power to him. But I don't believe that's what he wants. I think he cares deeply about challenges that folks have in this country, and he cares deeply about solving those problems. And I will say to you, Mr. Speaker, as I've said to all of my colleagues, we can do these things together. This is not a case of first impression. The gentleman knows that. We've come together in a bipartisan way to extend unemployment benefits. And just to be clear, because we spend a lot of time in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, creating fear out there. And I think that's one of the most shameful things that we are a part of, Mr. Speaker, creating fear for families that needn't have that fear. But for families that are concerned, we're talking about the emergency extended unemployment benefits. Those basic unemployment benefits that your state has guaranteed to you, nothing's happening to those. Nothing is happening to those, and folks need to know that. Those weeks of unemployment that the federal government has always provided, nothing's happening to those, and folks need to know that. What we're talking about are those emergency benefits. Now, what we've done in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, is come together not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but more to do this together. And we can do this together. But I promise you, Mr. Speaker, that we're only going to do it working together. If the answer is someone's got the heart and the other folks don't have a heart, we're not going to be able to solve that issue. I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Massachusetts.
I guess my question to the gentleman is that on December 28th, I think it's indisputable, 1,300,000 people will lose their benefit.